integrations, and how your institution can use those to make custom applications that interface with curriculum management. We're going to go over some examples that some engineers have made using the curriculum management API, and we're going to have a great time. So with that, we'll turn it over to Eric.
All right, thanks, Adam. All right. Hi, everybody. I'm Eric. Know many of you, see a lot of familiar faces. Engineering manager here at Kuali for the curriculum and catalog products. I'm joined by my colleagues, Brandon Nichols, Adam Blackburn, and Chandler Clement. And we're excited to show you what we've got for this technical session today. So here's a little outline for what the presentation is going to look like today. We're going to do sort of an overview of how we approach IT. We're going to talk about some common integration options. And then we're going to demo a starter repository that we're going to be attaching to this session as a handout that you can take back to your institution and use to kick things off for any integrations that you might want to build or something like that. We're going to show you a few examples using that integration starter repository, and we should have a little bit of time at the end to answer questions as well. Feel free to type questions in the chat, and we're going to do our best to respond as quickly as possible, but we'll try to get to all those questions at the end as well. So I wanted to start with just an IT overview, just to get us on the same page and frame the conversation here. These are the IT values that really guide our software development process and feature development process. And I want to focus specifically on this third one, tailored tech here. And for us, really what that means is tailored tech allows you to do a lot of different seamless integrations with current systems because it's specifically tailored to your needs. This is something that carries down from the configurability within the application. Our goal is really to make the system adapt to your data needs, adapt to your process needs, not the other way around. And we think the same is true for integrations. Oftentimes, we see one institution using, say, one student information system and another institution using the same student information system, but they're using it a little bit differently. So we've definitely seen a need for the integration approach to be custom tailored, custom configurable to meet those needs. We try to adopt an open, flexible, but powerful stance with our integration options. And that starts with our open REST API. We have documentation available at developers.kuali.co if you're not already familiar. Just a few points. The API is really going to be best used for bring your own types of integrations where you maybe want to make web service calls out. The data that you retrieve from the API is real time. It is querying the live database of whatever instance that you're querying. It follows common RESTful web service architecture. It is language agnostic, meaning if your institution primarily uses Ruby, just because our application is written in Node JavaScript, you're going to be able to interface with our API. We deploy versioned API endpoints so that if we make a substantial change to an API response, that's going to be a version change. So it's going to be sort of a non-breaking change for anything consuming those APIs. And then it's these last three, I mentioned the documentation online. These last 3 points are really around that the API interface is going to be tied to a key. that's tied to a user. And so all of the interactions that happen via the API are going to be logged in the same way that a user logging into the application and making changes are logged within the system. The ideal use cases for our REST API are going to be primarily around integrations that have business logic separate from the curriculum process. So they're not necessarily tied to curriculum-related governance events or anything like that, but they're sort of on-demand pull of data as needed, or a regular cadence pull of data. We've seen some institutions use this for custom website integrations, for instance, pulling some program information for particular programs into a particular portion of the college or university website. Certainly lots of reporting and analytics applications, and automating external processes as well. I want to talk a little bit about our SysConnector product, or SysConnector service. SysConnector is a student information system agnostic service that allows you to take data as it's stored in Kuali Curriculum Management, validate that data, transform that data, map it to the destination fields that you might want to send things to the student information system in, and allow that service to do the translation. It can follow both a push and a pull model. Push is certainly the most common. We'll talk a little bit more about that in the next slide. And it can facilitate both individual and bulk data extraction. Again, the push and the individual records are probably the most common, since that tends to be the most desired approach. It typically will deliver data in a JSON payload, but it can extract things in CSV format if bulk extraction is needed. Here's just a quick overview of what the architecture looks like for the SysConnector. So on the left-hand side, we have Kuali Curriculum Management, and we have a couple different types of records here. Here's a record where changes have been approved, and then maybe a new record was approved, or something like that. And when these types of events happen, we send the raw JSON data that we're storing within Curriculum Management to the SysConnector service. And then that's going to go ahead and map each configured data point and map it through to the appropriate destination key, transform that data in different ways. For example, if we have a description field that can only be 30 characters long or 100 characters long or something, we can apply that truncation before sending it along to the student information system, but still allow that information to exist in its purest form within Kuali Curriculum Management. And then once it's sent off to an endpoint for the student information system, we can consume that API response, if there is one from the student information system, we log that to an event log associated with the SysConnector. And then if there's a response data point that we need to push back to the corresponding record, for instance, an ID from the student information system, if we're creating a new record, we can do that as well. And so this is just sort of a more linear example of how this all works there, but just wanted to give that as a quick overview of a common integration tool. Here's some sample tables and sample tables that we would integrate with, typically with a banner type integration, and just an outline there. And then wanted to highlight PeopleSoft. These are probably the two most common that we will do integrations for. But as I mentioned earlier, it is student information system agnostic. And really it's just about taking the data as it exists in Kuali, translating it to the appropriate keys for a destination system, and delivering that to the desired endpoint. Okay, I'm gonna pause here, and I'm gonna hand it over to my colleague, Brandon Nichols, to talk a little bit about this integration starter repository, and then go, or repositories, I guess, and then go through the first of our 3 examples that we'd like to share with you.
Hey, yeah, great, thank you. So what we've started out with is we have these two starter repositories. One of them is for a command line application that you could use to access our APIs. And we have another one that's more of a starter web app that actually has a web page you can pull up in your browser. So let me share my screen here. You can see. Okay, let's start out by looking at the CLI one. So it's really a very simple project. There's not a whole lot to it, but it's kind of, we've tried to set it up so that you've got a little bit that would get you going. We use two libraries to help us out. One of them is called Commander. I'm kind of assuming you'll know some JavaScript and Node here. If not, hopefully you can kind of get the gist of it. But we're using this library called Commander, and what it does is it helps parse your command line parameters that are given, and making sure that if they're required, they're all there and whatnot. So for instance, you can see down here, in this example, what it does is it will allow you to search for a given course name, and it'll return back results that match that course name. So one of the parameters we're expecting is a course name here. Another one we're going to expect to be passed in is the base URL of the environment you're going to be hitting. So in my case, I'm going to hit one of our test environments. It's called monsters-test.kuali.co. And then the final required parameter that we're expecting is the API key. And then this line here, this tells Commander to go ahead and parse all your command line parameters that have been passed in. If some of them were not provided, then go ahead and print out an error message and fail. Otherwise, we'll get this options object that'll have all those parameters available to us for the rest of the code. So the second library we're using is called Axios. It's really a library that makes doing HTTP requests easier with Node. You can do it with just the built-in Node library, but this makes it a little bit simpler, a little bit cleaner. So what we do here is we just go ahead and create an instance of Axios with the base URL that has been passed in, and the API key is going to be set as a header, as an authorization header. And then we'll go ahead and use that later on. This is a function that we'll call, which it takes a query string as a parameter. So if I search for math, what it's going to do is it's going to hit our search endpoint using that query string, and it'll return up to 5 results. And then it'll just return that as the data that comes back from there. So then the last bit of code is basically just what actually happens when you hit enter on the application. So it'll have already done all the parsing of the command line parameters. So we'll have these things, and we'll just call that function I just was referencing, and we'll get the courses. And if there were any, then we'll go ahead and log them out to the console and print out their titles. Okay, so let's go ahead and see that in reality. So it's just the index file, which in Node is kind of like the default file will run. So you can see if I do node index, then Commander is doing its job, and it's saying, hey, you didn't give me a course name. One thing that is also nice about it is you can say --help, and it'll print out a little guide to all the things that you need to pass in. And that's based off of these things right here. It figures out for you. The description also gets put on there. It's kind of nice. It's not a necessary thing, but it's just a little help for you. So we need oops, I'm typing in the wrong window. We need a course name. So it looks like we're going to do CN, and let's just say we're going to search for wildlife. Okay. Okay, now it's telling us we need to give it a base URL. So we'll do https monsters-test.kuali.co. Okay, now we didn't give it the API key, so I'll go ahead and do that. I've already copied one from elsewhere, so that's what that is. I'm just pasting it on there. Now we do it and everything runs and we get back the top 5 results that matched the term wildlife. Some of these, actually all these do have it in the title. Some of it, it'll search the description and things like that too. So that's a basic starter app for command line. So now let's look at web app starter. So to do this, what we started out with is a tool called Create React App, which it spins up a project for you that's already got React and Webpack configured for you, and it will it gives you a built-in dev server you can use, so you don't have to worry about having something to host the files and all that. And we also added on a little bit of extra stuff to make it so that you can hit our API endpoints without having to have any CORS issues, so cross-origin problems. It'll just handle that for you. So there's 2 files you're really going to have to worry about in here. The first one is this config.json file, and you can see that it just has your the Kuali host that like I was using before, where I just set it to monsters-test, and then you've got your API key that's also in here. Then the other file you'll need to worry about is this app.js, and this is going to be your React component. It's a starter component. So before I go into the code of it, let's see what it looks like. So you start it by just running yarn start, and this will spin up the local dev server for you, and it'll open the web page. So, and you can see what there is it's got a text box where you can type something in, and it will return, I think, up to the first 30 results that match that. And so that's really all there is to it. So let's start out by looking at the HTML that it's going to generate. You can see here we've got the label. Let's do this side by side. So we have the label that is there, the input that is here, and then we have an ordered list of all of the items with their titles. So it's pretty basic. The rest of the component is not too complicated. I won't go into the details of how React components work, but there are state variables, and we have 2 of those. One of them is the courses, which is more or less the results that we get back from the API. And then there's the query string that is what's typed in right here. And we have a little bit of code right here. This use effect, it's a hook, a React hook. And what that really does is it says, whenever the page loads or the query string changes, we want to run all of this code right here. So what happens is if I type in a character, it kicks this off and it uses the fetch API built into the browser. You could use Axios or whatever library you wanted to make the API call. But we're just using fetch. And it's basically the same API call we were doing in the command line app, and we paste on the query string. Only difference is we set it to 30 in this case. But and then we set the authorization header based on the value in the config file again. And then we turn that the results from that into JSON and set it on our courses state variable. And then the way React works, it sees that course's value has changed and will re-render and give us the titles of all of those things right there. So that's about all there is to this starter app. And then I'll give you one more example. It's another kind of basic web app that you could go a little bit farther with, and then Chandler and Adam will go even farther than that. I'm now looking at the actual CM application, and we have configured out here on our course template, we have in the course information section, a table that lists out the course materials that would be required for this course. And let's go out here and look at, let's say this one. And if you scroll down, Introduction to Wildlife Management, it requires tranquilizers, gloves, and radio tags. And these are just something I put in on this particular course. Not all of them are going to have this, but this one will have it. So I wanted to make a web application that you can search for a course, and if it has course materials that are required, it will show those also to you. So let's go ahead and run that. So I'll show you what it looks like. Again, it's based on that same starter template, so you can just run yarn start and that'll open it up. And it's loading. Okay, so it's got a text box I can type in, and say type in wildlife, or start to type in wildlife, and the first one that comes up is our one where we've got tranquilizers, gloves, and radio tags. Great. So now let's look at the code that actually does that. Again, we just have a config.json file, which is the same as the other one, and we have our app.js file. And what's happening here is, let's look at the HTML again. We've got our label, our input, and we have, it prints out the title, which is right here. And then if we have a course materials item that has been returned, it will show this ordered list of all of those course materials. So the code appears a little bit more involved, but not that much. You can see that when the text box changes, we call set query, which is going to set our query state variable again. And let's see where it is. This one, use effect, just like before. This is going to fire do search, which we've defined up here. And what it does is it makes sure that the query string is actually a value first, otherwise it doesn't do a search. And if there is a valid query string, then we'll do this, which you'll see looks very similar. It's just another search with that query, gets the results. This is more or less the same as the other one. The only difference is the limit is 1. And now, once we have that, if we find that we found a matching course, we'll go ahead and call this new function called get course details. And you can see what it does is it calls out to another one of our APIs. It's more or less just getting all of the course details for this particular ID, and it will return that as JSON. So now this JSON object right here is going to have all of the details of this particular course, and we'll set that onto our course state variable. And then down here, we look it up based on this, and we'll have a material property, and that one will actually, it's going to be a course materials property is what it's called, and we will just print those out as individual list items. So that's just a rough example of how you could do something simple like that, accessing different fields on the form. So I'll stop sharing, and then now we'll move on to Chandler's example, which goes a little bit farther.
And I just want to step in real quick and just drive home one point, and that is that obviously in curriculum management, we're storing all kinds of data, and that's going through the governance process within curriculum management. And so what Brandon showed you is just one sample way to leverage that data without needing to enter it somewhere else or maintain it somewhere else. Because of the open nature of the APIs, you're able to query, and that was just one example of a data point that you could extract from CM for that kind of use case. So sorry to interject, Chandler, you're up.
No problem, thanks. Okay, so let me share my screen real quick. Okay. So from what I've heard, one of the most common tasks or problems that you might run into when making an integration is trying to get items for a particular term, all the active items for a particular term. So I guess what my project sets out to do is to fetch fetch items according to a term that you choose. So in my little project here, we have that same, and this all borrows very heavily from Brandon's example that he just showed you. So we have our little query search box up here to filter our results. And this is our term picker. So you can choose a month and a year that you want to search on. And then it'll return the active items for that term. So right now we just have courses and programs, but you could do other item types if you'd like specializations and things like that. Let's see. So yeah, so if you change this, it loads some different results. And we're returning 10 at a time, but you can also paginate. Quickly load more. I can show you how we do that behind the scenes. So it's a pretty simple app, but it's a pretty important common task that we're accomplishing here. So I can show you the code that does this. And a lot of it will look pretty familiar from Brandon's, hopefully. So up here, I just have the months and the years I want to search on. And terms, they vary from institution to institution. So you could set up your term picker a different way if you'd like to. So down here, we have our app. And we have that same use effect hook that Brandon was talking about that hits the API. We hit it down here with the fetch, and it gets our courses and programs. So one thing I want to note that's important is that instead of hitting the search endpoint, that's a part of our MPI, we're hitting the endpoint for each item type. So this would be courses or programs. And then some other parameters that you pass in are the term that you want to search on. That we just put right here. Oh, oops. And then that's just a string date. And then you give it the query that you might want to search for. In this case, I just have it set up to the item's title. Up here, you just give it title, and then you pass in whatever value you'd like. And then we make sure that the status is active. So status is another parameter. It's part of this API endpoint. And then the way we're handling the pagination, hitting 10 at a time, is the skip parameter. And that's set through some of the state variables. Similar, we use this use state, similar to what Brandon was doing. So if you pass in like 10 for skip, then it'll get to the next 10 items that are returned from the API. So yeah, that's how we're fetching the data. So that updates these use state variables that we have. And then down here, we're returning some of the HTML that displays the tables and the paginate buttons that control that. I won't go into too much detail on that. But yeah, it just shows a table with the data. And each of these items, each of the courses and programs, they each have these different fields like title, ID, date start, and date end. And there's a whole bunch of other variables that are contained within this item that's returned from the API. So you could display whatever sort of information you might like to in this table. And yeah, that's about it. Yeah, it was really nice to be able to borrow from Brandon's repository to get started on this, and it didn't take too long to get this app running. So yeah, that's my little example project, and I'll hand it off to Adam.
Awesome. Thanks, Chandler. So let's share my screen here. All right, so I've pulled up just a course here, Math 1050. Probably almost everyone has to take this class. And there is, on this form, there's a prerequisite section, which use the Omega Rules gadget, which, basically you go in and you can list the requirements to take this course. You need to get a C in at least one of these four. You got 1010, 1060, 1080, 1090. But what this doesn't show you is maybe 1090 requires another course. And maybe to take 1090, you have to take that course, and then that course requires another course, and so on and so forth. And so it'd be cool to be able to visualize that whole tree going down. There's this library called React Graph Viz. And it basically just lets you do this a little tree visualization here, or technically it's called a graph. Let me just show you their example source code for this page. There's just one little piece of it that I want to show you is just how you set up the data, where you give it a graph and it has nodes. And in our case, each node would be a course. It would have an ID label and color. And then you would have edges where you say course 1 would depend on course 2 is essentially what these are saying. So let me just show you this little, and this again is based on all the work that Brandon did. It's building off of that Create React app that he put together. I'm just going to search for Math 1050, which is the course we were just looking at, and hit go. It's going to load. It'll pop up and show us Math 1050 is here. And don't worry about these arrows going both ways. They're probably co-requisites, or there's other things that you can put in the rules. So it's not necessarily dependency. But you can see Math 1050 requires 1090, 1090 requires 1030, and both of them require 1010. And then we can put in, say, Math 6040, which I believe is a graduate level course. And it might take just a second. Oh, there we go. You can see that we get a much bigger graph here. So here's 640, and you can trace this down, and it kind of gets into this little web here. This is also just a fun library because there's a little physics simulation. You can drag it around. Yeah, so this is just like a fun example of you can do some cool visualizations with the CM data. I'll just go over a little bit of source code with you. And again, this is all based on the React app that Brandon put together as a starter kit. And so this is the search portion where, just like with the other ones, you type in the search box and you hit go. And it's going to hit this search endpoint, API v0cm search, and pass in the relevant query string with the query, which is what you typed in. It'll get a response, and just because it's a demo, we just grab the very first one, and we just grab the ID off of that, and we set that ID, which triggers this one, and it's going to call this get course graph, which is a little function down here. And I won't go too deep into the algorithm of how this works unless anyone's really interested in that. But basically, it just says we know we have to find this PID or this course ID. And so put it on the list. And basically, we're going to call this get course function, which is just right above it. And this will call the Curriculum Management API and say, give me the latest version of this course. And then we get the course back. And then we're going to call this traverse function on the course prerequisites. And this basically, the omega rules, which is the thing represented here. This is just a huge JSON object that comes back. And so we're just going to walk through it in here. And we're just going to say, anytime we find course in here, or yeah, course dependency, or yeah, anytime we find course or courses, we're just going to add that ID to the list of other courses we're going to find. And that's going to come back, and we're going to say, this course has all these dependencies, so let's go fetch those. And those will have dependencies, and we'll fetch those. And so that's basically how that works. It's just going to go and fetch and fetch and fetch until it runs out of things to fetch. And then we've included this React Graph Viz library, which is just a node package or an NPM package. And then I won't go into how this works. They have tons of documentation. But basically, we just pass in our graph that we made using the data that we got from fetching the dependencies and the dependencies, and we just pass all that data in. And then with that, it'll just render this out for us. And so you get this fun visualization. So yeah, we'll pass it back to Eric now.
Great, thanks, Adam. Thanks, Chandler. Thanks, Brandon. So I wanted to just reiterate this this final point here, and then we'll open it up to questions. And as I mentioned earlier, lots of data is being managed within curriculum management. Brandon highlighted the requirements. We talked about this, the start term and, retrieving active courses for a given month and year. And Adam noted the requirements tree and things like that. And that's all being managed in the application. There's lots of ways to interact with that in the application, but the APIs really open up the possibility of leveraging that externally and reducing duplicative data load, which can open you up to human error and whatnot. So we really try to encourage our partner institutions to use these, and we're really excited, as we bring on more and more customers, to see the different ways that our partner institutions are using the APIs in different ways to solve problems on campus and make things more efficient. So we'd like to invite you to rate this session. I know this is one of the more technical sessions, so if that resonated for you, we'd love to hear that. If it was a little too in the weeds, we'd love to hear that too. But we hope that this has been a useful demonstration. And as I mentioned, we'll be providing that repo to I think it's attached as a handout to the session, so be on the lookout for that. Yeah, want to pause here for any questions that I know that there have been a few that have come in. I think we've answered most of those along the way, but and this is not a webinar format, so if you want to go ahead and unmute, I believe you can do that and ask your questions. Otherwise, please feel free to type in the chat too.
Yes, I'll ask a question.
Sure.
First of all, it's funny because Eric, last year in Kuali Days, you told me I probably shouldn't go to a technical session like this, and here I am again. But my question is, like, the course mapping stuff. If we were interested in working with you guys and trying to create something like that, how would we go about that? Because I think we could definitely think of some cool ideas as to what we'd want represented and how, but just not have the ability to do it, obviously.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, typically that would start with your customer success manager, the conversations going on there. Obviously, with we have some things on the stove essentially with SNHU right now, so that's a little bit different. But yeah, it would start with reaching out to your customer success manager to figure out what you're going for and identifying those requirements and figuring out next steps there. Mm-hmm.
Cool, thank you.
Yeah, thanks for the question. And Susan, I have to say I very much enjoyed seeing your cat. So thanks for letting him say hello, him or her say hello.
She really likes these kinds of meetings. I don't know why. She usually shows up.
Very technical cat.
Yeah. Oh, that's a great idea, James. We should take that back. Adding an area in Zendesk to share code. I really like that idea.
I want to thank you. I really enjoyed seeing the outline of how the sys connector goes through, because as you know, we're using files coming from Kuali into Boomi and then into our sys system. Mm-hmm. So seeing it lined out really helped me understand it a little better. So thank you.
Absolutely. I'm glad that helped. All right. Well, thank you all so much for joining us. We really appreciate the opportunity to present this. This is sort of a new integration style presentation for us, but it was I think fun and good for the team to all chip in and build something to demonstrate some possibilities there. So we really appreciate your time. Hope this was an informative session, and hope you enjoy the rest of Kuali Days. Hope to see some of you at the next sessions and maybe code words later today if you're going to join us for that game. So great. Thanks, everybody.